Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome everybody to the Aliyah Day. I am glad to be with all of you precious souls who are watching from across the fruited plain. Glad that you are here for the fourth day of our Aliyah study here in Parashah Chayei Sarah. I believe that we're going to have some good things to study today, some good things to think about, and Hashem's going to, Bezrat Hashem, open up our eyes. I want to welcome those of us who are together this morning. We welcome Juan. Glad you're here. Janaea from Kansas City. Glad that you were here. Calvin from Denton, Texas. Welcome. Glad you're here, sir. Yara, welcome from Greenville, Texas. From who else do we have? Stephanie from California. Welcome. Shoshana Brenner. Joy from New Hampshire. Glad you're here. Sue Ellen. Welcome. Watching from Oklahoma. Shimon from Tulsa. Good to see you, my brother. And let's see, we have Lynn. Welcome, Lynn. We have Keturah, our faithful Keturah. Celia, one of our local Lepidniks. Yiska, watching from Florida. Diane, welcome. Patricia, Elvra, welcome. Dominique, watching from Kansas City. Shoshana Tiemann, welcome. Glad you were here. Watching also from Tulsa. Gianna Del Telo, welcome. Who else do we have? Who's Claire? Watching from South Africa. Welcome. Glad you're here. We have all these our Lepidniks from Houston. Ingrid, welcome. Daniel, welcome. John, good evening, sir. Welcome. Watching from India. Nikki, welcome. Watching all the way from the Boston area. That's a wonderful, beautiful area. Azariah, one of our local Lepidniks. Gabrielle, watching from Germany. The Deutschland, welcome. Glad you were here. Shlomo, one of our local Lepidniks. Of course, he's actually on campus, so we're grateful for that. Al Henry, welcome. Leda, welcome. Hadassah Bauer, welcome. Miguel, bienvenidos. Wow, so many wonderful people. It's glad to have everybody here. We are in the Art Scroll Chumash on page 115, and we'll be reading beginning in chapter 24 and verse 26. As we're reading the story of Eliezer, Eliezer, who has gone to find a wife for Rebecca. So there's a lot to learn here, a lot of great insights. We're going to learn a little bit today about who Eliezer was and his character. We're going to learn something about marriage. We're probably going to touch a few points anyway today about what we were talking about yesterday about mourning a saint. There's still some things I think that are good to know with respect to insights there. But let's see how far we can get. Chapter 24, verse 26. It says, "So the man bowed low and prostrated himself to Adonai. And he said, Blessed is Adonai, God of my master Abraham, who has not withheld his kindness and truth from my master. As for me, Adonai has guided me on the way to the house of my master's brothers. The maiden ran and told her mother's household according to these events." Okay. It says, Rebecca had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran to meet the man. Now, we're going to come back to that in a second because there's an opening insight I have that's very interesting that's going to teach us a little bit about why, or perhaps I should say, in fairness, possibly why Yeshua walked on water. We'll come back to that in a second. Verse 34, upon seeing the nose ring, the bracelets on his sister's hands, and upon hearing his sister's Rebecca's words, saying, Thus has the man spoken to me, he approached the man who was still standing by the camels by the springs, and he said, Come, O blessed of Adonai, why should you stand outside when I have cleared the house and made a place for the camels? So the man entered the house, unmuzzled the camels. He gave straw and feed for the camels and water to bathe his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Food was set before him, but he said, I will not eat until I have spoken my piece. And he said, Speak. Verse 34. Then he said, A servant of Abraham am I. Adonai has greatly blessed my master, and he prospered. He has given him flocks, cattle, silver and gold, servants and maidservants, camels and donkeys. Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son after he had grown old, and he gave him all that he possessed. And my master had me take an oath, saying, do not take a wife from my son, from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, unless you go to my father's house and to my family and take a wife for my son. And I said to my master, perhaps the woman will not follow me. And he replied to me, Hashem, before whom I walked, Adonai, before whom I walked, will send angel with you and make your journey successful. And you will take a wife for my son from my family and my father's house. Then you will be absolved from my oath. When you have come to my family, and if they will not give her to you, then you shall be absolved from my oath. Verse 42. It says, I came today to the spring and said, Adonai, God of my master, Abraham, if you would graciously make successful the way on which I go, behold, I'm standing by the spring of water. Let it be that a young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, please give me some water to drink from my jug. Now, this is where we have the interchangeable word, Alma. As I mentioned yesterday, one of the arguments is what talks about the virgin shall give birth to a child. The people argue and say, well, actually that word is betula, or excuse me, Alma. The word is Alma there. And the word for virgin in Hebrew is betula. And so it doesn't mean that the virgin will give birth to a child, because they say that Alma simply means young woman. Doesn't mean virgin. And in order for it to mean virgin, you have to say betula. But that's not true, because Alma is a synonym for betula, and it implies virginity. For instance, we know that Eliezer is looking for a wife for his master's son, Isaac. But you know he's not just going out there looking for any old woman. He's looking for a virgin. So to suggest that an Alma cannot mean virgin, then that would mean that when he refers to Rebekah as an Alma, that it means she's not a virgin, which of course would be obviously incorrect. We have many synonyms like this and inferences in other languages. For instance, in Spanish, español, if you're talking about a woman who's not yet been married and therefore has presumably not been with a man, you refer to her as a señorita. If she's been with a man or been married, then she is now a señora. Those of you who are Spanish speakers out there can confirm yay or nay to what I just said. So verse 44, and who will answer? You may also drink, and I will draw water for your camels too. She shall be the woman whom Adonai has designated for my master's son. So we have two Spanish speakers already saying you are correcto. Verse 45. I had not yet finished meditating when suddenly Rebekah came out with a jug on her shoulder and descended to the spring and drew water. Then I said to her, please give me a drink. She hurried and lowered her jug from upon herself and said, drink, and I will even water your camels. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I questioned her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Michal bore to him. And I placed the ring on her nose and the bracelet on her hand. And then I bowed and prostrated myself to Adonai and blessed Adonai, God of my master Abraham, who led me on a true path to take the daughter of my master's brother for his son. And now, if you intend to do kindness and truth to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, and I'll turn to the right. I will turn to the right or to the left. Then Laban and Bethuel answered, the matter stemmed from Adonai. We can say to you, neither good nor bad. Here, Adonai is before you. Take her and go, and let her be a wife to your master's son, as Adonai has spoken. And it was when Abraham's servant heard these words, he prostrated himself to the ground unto Adonai. So that's the end of our reading. I want to go to an insight here. I want to lead off with this very intriguing insight that may give us an idea, an example, a reason why Yeshua walked on water. I've never really given it much thought, but I'm sure that it had to be something significant. And it wasn't just, if you'll forgive the The wording just like some kind of circus act. Like, I'm just going to walk on water because it's never been done. He could have walked. He could have done a lot of things. He could have walked on air, like the greatest American hero. He could have done anything, but he chose to walk on water. Why? Because everything that the Mashiach did had a purpose. So let's look at this insight. It says in verse 30, talking about Laban. Laban was an evil person. It says Mayam Loez comments to this verse, Laban or Lavan in Hebrew means white. White is an obvious color. Laban's wickedness was equally obvious. So it says here, it says that Laban, had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's hands. And he had heard his sister Rebekah's words describing what the man had said to her. He came to the man who was still standing beside the camel near the well. Now, we know Laban later is going to be identified as a very greedy person, a stingy person, a miserly person, and a cheater. Someone who is stealing, basically. He lies to Jacob. He tricks him into serving him for 14 years rather than 7, and then takes his stuff and all those, changes his wages, moves the proverbial goalposts. We learn about Laman's character. So it says here, Mam Loez's commentary to verse 30, it says, assuming that Eliezer was a wealthy merchant, Laban ran to the well to kill him and rob his possessions. Aware of Laban's intentions, Eliezer levitated himself along with the camels. When Laban approached, he was hovering over the well. The verse literally says, behold, the man was standing on the camels on the well. That's what it literally says, according to the insights here. That's the literal interpretation of the Hebrew, according to Yalkut Shimoni. So it says Eliezer was able to do this through pure meditative power. Now stick with me for a second. It says such levitation, however, could also be accomplished through black magic, but that's not what that's not what Eliezer is doing. Not wanting Laban to assume, listen to this, pay close attention. Not wanting Laban to assume that he was engaged in sorcery. How was he levitating? According to this, he was levitating because he was meditating on Hashem's word, that he was meditating on the things of God. And so he had this experience. Now, before I continue reading, I want to say that isn't it true? And the answer is yes, it's true, Rabbi. That one of the accusations against Mashiach in the Besorot, in the Gospels, and also one of the accusations about Mashiach in rabbinic literature is that he was a sorcerer. That in fact, all of these miracles that he was doing was because of sorcery and witchcraft, chas v'shalom, but not because the power of God. And didn't Yeshua say, if I do these things through the power of Beelzebub, then how do you accomplish such things? What did he mean by that? He meant that miracles can happen through black magic and miracles can happen through proper, let's say, spiritual channels. That's what's going on here. So let's continue reading. He says, not wanting Laban to assume that he was engaged in sorcery, Eliezer stood on the surface of the water in the well. Why? Those versed in the occult, as Laban surely was, remember? He was versed in the occult. We learned that later. Those versed in the occult arts know that they are powerless when in contact with water. So why did the Mashiach walk on water? Of all the things he could have done, was it just some circus act? He was just wanting to show, hey, look at me. I can do something that no one else can do. No. Because he knew that he would be accused of sorcery, of witchcraft, of doing what he did miracle-wise through this magic arts. And so, like Eliezer, he walked on water to prove that his great acts and great deeds do not come from magic, but they come from the power of God, because if they had come from magic, then an occultist can have no contact with the water. Isn't that interesting? See, we have to understand that there's a reason for everything that we read in Scripture, and we have to just seek out those reasons. Very, very interesting. Now, I want to just read a couple of things here from leaving off. We're just going to kind of tie a bow around these concept of mourning. First thing, it says here, this insight. On Yom Kippur, we read the portion from Leviticus chapter 16 referred to as Akari Mot, after the death. It says, so the question becomes, why do we do that on Yom Kippur? Why is that a part of the Yom Kippur service? Well, for one thing, Leviticus 16 is where we have the laws, the halakot of Yom Kippur. But there's another reason. We've just been talking about the fact that when we mourn a righteous person, we receive a level of forgiveness. So it says, when a person grieves the death of a saint, his sins are forgiven. This is the reason it was ordained to read the section dealing with the death of Aaron's sons, Akari Mot, on Yom Kippur. Why? Because upon hearing the story of the death of these two saints, the congregation should grieve, causing their sins to be atoned. Who is a saint? I'm talking about mourning saints. Are we talking about only great sages and so on? No. Here's a definition of a saint from Mayam Loez. This is his opinion to that question. When we speak of a saint or a sage, we are not only speaking of someone, he says, who is extraordinarily great. This designation can even include one who knows the laws that apply to him, avoids sin, and tries to keep all the commandments that pertain to him. He deals honestly in business, which is a big mitzvah, does not mislead others, pays his debts on time, and does not harm others for his own gain. In his own way, such a person is called a tzaddik, and his death atones for his contemporaries. This is a interesting precedent, because if you follow some lines of thought from the anti-missionaries, that a man dies for his own sins. But that's not exactly how Judaism views it, that a tzaddik can die for the forgiveness of his contemporaries. Here's another very important precedent, and this will kind of conclude our thoughts on mourning, and we'll move on to the character of Eliezer. How many of you have read and or heard me say that Yeshua is the Word of God manifest? Right? Right. Now, it's very important that when we find precedents for important things such as that we identify them. Is there a precedent for Torah becoming manifest among us? Well, my friends, it's just so happens that I was minding my own business and I was reading Mayam Loez, and out of nowhere, I was hit in the face with a precedent. So here we go. Here's the story. There was once a scholar who had a practice of studying. He was studying the Talmudic tractate of Hagiga. Now, Hagiga means literally festivity. It also means festival offerings. It's the tractate that deals with the halakha regarding the festival offerings and how we're supposed to carry them out. It says a small tractate And he studied this because he did not know anything else. He didn't know anything else, so he spent his entire time fulfilling Hagiga. He reviewed it over and over. All his life, he studied this tract until he knew it perfectly by heart. When he died, he was old and alone. No one even knew when he passed away. Suddenly, a woman appeared in his room and began to mourn him. She cried in a loud voice until she had attracted the neighbors. The woman said to them, "Mourn for him, bewail him, honor him, for this man was a saint who will be welcomed with open arms in the world to come. This saint honored me very much. He never took his mind away from me." The woman accompanied the scholar until he was buried. After the funeral, people asked her name, to which she replied, "My name is Hagiga." When they returned from the cemetery, the woman vanished and was never seen again. People then realized that the woman was none other than the spirit of the tractate Hagiga, and they understood that this scholar must have been a great saint, for Providence had brought about such a phenomenon to publicize his greatness. Now, the reason I share that story is because we have there, if you listen closely, an important precedent. An important precedent. That in this story, we learn, whether you believe it or not, at this point, is really kind of irrelevant. All right? Because there might be somebody, and the reason I say this is because there might be somebody out there that is saying, "That's crazy. That didn't happen. That's insane." Whether you believe it or not, at this point is irrelevant. I want you to just stick with me for a second, because according to this story found in the writings of Mayam Loez, according to this story, when this saint died, the tractate that he was studying, the tractate Hagiga, manifests in order to mourn him. So when we talk about the Torah manifesting as the Mashiach, some might say that is insane. God would never do that. That's so crazy. That never happened, except when it does. There's another precedent here. We learn that the offering, the atonement of Mashiach, the offering of Mashiach affected many things. Judaism teaches, by the way, that this is what's going to happen with Mashiach, that the evil urge, the Yetzer Hara, is going to be taken away. And it's just interesting because Mayam Loez brings down another insight. There are several benefits that occur to Abraham after he has offered his son Isaac as an Akedah. And one of the things it says here, I just want to throw this out here, is it says that Abraham gained authority over the evil urge. In other words, that because he offered his son, one of the advantages, one of the benefits of that was that he gained advantage over the evil urge. And it says also here, one of the other advantages is that Abraham was included among the 7 saints whose bodies did not experience decay. There's another precedent. We say that the Mashiach's body did not experience decay. Well, who were the 7 saints, by the way? Because somebody's asking. The saints are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Miriam, and Benjamin. And some people also include King David in that. Now, what's the difference, though, between Mashiach and these saints that says their bodies didn't experience decay? What's the difference between them and the Mashiach? And the Mashiach is that not only did his body not experience decay, but he was resurrected. That's the big difference, of course. Now, who is Eliezer? Let's get to this insight, shall we? We'll deal with some of these for the remaining part of our Aliyah this morning. Eliezer is the servant whom Abraham sent to go find the the wife for his son Isaac. It says, when Abraham escaped Nimrod's fiery furnace, Nimrod gave him a servant named Eliezer. Some say that Eliezer was actually the son of Nimrod. But anyway, it says, living with Abraham, Eliezer gained a high degree of perfection. Extremely intelligent, he learned very much from Abraham, and what he learned, he could also teach others. It says, therefore, he was thus in charge of all that Abraham had. That means he was in charge of Abraham's teachings. It says, Eliezer was also in complete control of his emotions and his passions, living a saintly life. The expressions who was in charge of all that he had can also be interpreted to refer to this. It says Eliezer was in charge, that is, quote, end quote, of all that Eliezer had. Eliezer was a person who was in complete control of his emotions. I just want to tell you, everybody, that being in complete control of our emotions is a very, very important midot. One of the important midot. To be calm, to be and being in control of our emotions, by the way, means that we have to be in tune with proper emunah and bitachon, proper faith and proper trust. And it requires working on it. So it says, the verse also teaches that Eliezer resembled Abraham physically so that people could not tell him apart. This is also an interesting insight because so here we know that Eliezer is not genetically related to Abraham, yet because he followed Abraham's teachings and because he submitted himself and because he became a partner with Abraham in his mission, he took on the likeness of Abraham. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we take on the likeness of our rabbi. Here I'm talking about Rabbi Yeshua, the true Mashiach of Israel. This is not an uncommon thing, because this is why you see in Yiddishkeit you have Jews and they will try to dress like their rabbi. They try to wear the same hat that their rabbi wears, the same fedora. What's the reason? Because they're trying to emulate their rabbi in every respect, and they're trying to look like him. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing I'm talking about here. So some say that this verse actually is saying that Eliezer was in charge of his property. It says there are many people who pursue wealth and think of nothing else. Such a person is dominated by his wealth, and he cannot be said to be in charge of it. He lusts for money, can bring him false oaths, bribery, robbery, thousands of other falsehoods. He's so engrossed in gaining money that he ignores his prayers and does not even ask God for help. Shimon, you've asked me this before. I'm going to tell you. I'll take a picture of the brand name and tell you, Baruch Hashem. So it's one who has faith, however, is happy with what he has and does not transgress the Torah to gain wealth. Rather, he prefers to use what he has for charity and good deeds. Such a person can be said to be in charge of his wealth. That is, his wealth is not in charge of him. This is the character of Eliezer, that his stuff did not consume him. He was in charge of his own emotions. He didn't seek after wealth. Nothing wrong with being wealthy. Nothing wrong with working hard. Nothing wrong with pursuing a good career. Absolutely not. But we got to make sure that we do it not to the detriment of our spirituality. And of course, not to forsake our spirituality. So it says, this explains how Abraham could have depended upon Eliezer for such a sensitive mission. If Eliezer came back with an unsuitable wife who could easily have bribed by a wealthy man who wanted his daughter to marry Isaac and presented her as a perfect match. In other words, if he lusted after wealth, he could have been bribed. For this reason, it says that Torah tells us that Eliezer was a person who dominated his wealth and was not dominated by it, he would not violate a trust for money. Adonai could therefore trust him completely. End of our Aliyah today. We'll come back tomorrow because there's lots to be said about marriage and finding a suitable mate that we derive from this passage, and we will dive into that tomorrow. Until then, may you have a beautiful, blessed, and amazing day. I pray that we see everybody here tomorrow. And until then, have peace and prosperity and blessing in the name of the Messiah, Yeshua. Shalom and blessings.